Mini Uzi, Call of Duty 4, Modern Warfare. Let's start with a weapon that set the standard for terrible SMGs right from the franchise's breakout multiplayer hit. The Mini Uzi in Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare wasn't just bad, it was offensively and laughably incompetent. This thing made the notoriously weak Klob from GoldenEye 007 look like a precision instrument by comparison. On paper, a fully automatic SMG should excel in close-quarters combat, but the Mini Uzi defied all logic and game design principles. It combined horrific recoil with abysmal damage output, creating a perfect storm of uselessness. The visual design alone worked against you. The muzzle flash was so bright and obstructive that it actually made aiming more difficult, especially in darker areas of maps. Even if you managed to control the bizarre recoil pattern, which sent shots spraying in every conceivable direction, you'd likely run out of ammo before securing a kill thanks to its blistering fire rate and pathetic damage per bullet. Compared to other SMGs in the game like the MP5 or the UMP45, which were absolute laser beams, the Mini Uzi stood out as a textbook example of how not to balance a weapon. It was so bad that many players suspected it existed purely as a progression trap, something to waste your time with until you unlocked better options. Even slapping a silencer on it, which normally reduces recoil in many COD games, couldn't save this disaster of a weapon, as the attachment further reduced its already pitiful damage output. The Mini Uzi wasn't just the worst SMG in Call of Duty 4. It set a benchmark for terrible weapons that would echo throughout the franchise for years to come. M1 Garand, original Call of Duty. Now let's jump all the way back to where it all began. The original Call of Duty from 2003. While World at War would later deliver a much more satisfying version of this weapon, the M1 Garand in the first Call of Duty was a profound disappointment, especially considering its real-world legacy as one of the most effective infantry rifles of World War II. The problem started with the iron sights, which were awkward and obstructive compared to other weapons in the game. While the Thompson SMG dominated close quarters and the Springfield sniper rifle handled long range, the M1 Garand found itself in an awkward middle ground where it wasn't exceptional at anything. The recoil made follow-up shots difficult. The reload mechanic, which couldn't be interrupted mid-clip, often left players vulnerable at critical moments, and the damage output simply couldn't compete with other options. Perhaps most damningly, there was no scoped variant available to help mitigate its aiming issues. In a game where various sniper rifles offered clear optical advantages, the M1 Garand forced players to struggle with its subpar iron sights, while offering no meaningful benefits to compensate for this disadvantage. It occupied that special tier of uselessness, where a weapon isn't just statistically inferior, but actually feels bad to use on a fundamental level. For a firearm with such historical significance, its virtual implementation was nothing short of tragic. Dragunov Modern Warfare 2019 and Modern Warfare 3. Sniper rifles in Call of Duty typically fall into two categories: quick scoping machines that dominate multiplayer, or hard scoping instruments of precision that reward patience. The Dragunov has managed to be neither across multiple games, earning it a special place in the Hall of Shame for sniper rifles. In Modern Warfare 2019, the Dragunov suffered a severe damage fall-off, which is basically the opposite of what you want from a sniper rifle. At range, where snipers should excel, the Dragunov often required multiple shots to eliminate enemies, which is a death sentence in modes where quick, single-shot kills are essential. The recoil was so violent that follow-up shots became incredibly difficult, and the weapon's handling characteristics made it feel sluggish compared to other options in its class. The situation wasn't much better in Modern Warfare 3, where the Dragunov received a brutal damage nerf that made it only lethal with headshots. The removal of stopping power as a perk across the game meant there was no way to boost its damage output, and while the developers tried to compensate by allowing an ACOG scope attachment, this couldn't fix the fundamental problems with the weapon. What makes the Dragunov particularly frustrating is that it appears in multiple games with the same core issues. It's not just a one-off mistake in weapon balancing. It's a consistent pattern of failure that has made the Dragunov synonymous with disappointment for sniper enthusiasts across the franchise. Uzi Call of Duty Black Ops. If you thought the Mini Uzi from COD D4 was bad, wait until you experience its big brother in Call of Duty Black Ops. This iteration of the Uzi took everything wrong with the earlier version and amplified it, creating what many consider to be a strong contender for the worst weapon in Call of Duty history. The Black Ops Uzi combined terrible iron sights with a recoil pattern that seemed actively hostile to the player. Where most weapons in the game had predictable recoil that could be managed with practice, the Uzi would kick vertically while also swaying horizontally with each shot, making it nearly impossible to stay on target even at medium range. The damage profile was abysmal, requiring more hits to kill than comparable SMGs, while offering no advantages to offset this weakness. Even attachment options couldn't save this disaster. The grip attachment, which reduced recoil on other weapons, did little to tame the Uzi's wild behavior. Rapid fire actually made the situation worse by increasing the fire rate without addressing the fundamental accuracy problems, effectively just allowing you to miss faster. The Uzi represented everything that could go wrong with a weapon in Call of Duty. Poor visual design, terrible handling characteristics, weak damage output, and minimal attachment synergy. It wasn't just outclassed by other SMGs, it was outclassed by every other weapon category in the game. In a title with generally solid weapon balance, the Uzi stood out as a spectacular failure. F2000 Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2. Modern Warfare 2 is remembered for many things: iconic maps, the introduction of killstreaks, and of course, some of the most overpowered weapons in franchise history. But amidst all the noob tubes and intervention quickscopes, there existed a weapon so underwhelming that most players forgot it existed: the F2000 assault rifle. On paper, the F2000 should have been incredible. A high rate of fire assault rifle with futuristic aesthetics. In practice, it was a masterclass in disappointment. The problem started with the iron sights, which were arguably the worst in the entire game. The obstructive design made target acquisition difficult, essentially forcing players to waste an attachment slot on a red dot sight just to make the weapon usable. Even with improved sights, the F2000 still suffered from pitiful damage and a bizarre recoil pattern that made consistent accuracy nearly impossible. The reload speed was one of the slowest in its class, leaving players vulnerable at critical moments. In a game where the ACR offered laser-like precision and the FAMAS could delete enemies in a single burst, the F2000 had no identifiable role or advantage. What makes the F2000 particularly memorable is how it stood out as terrible even in a game filled with overpowered weapons. While everyone else was running around with one-hit kill shotguns and death from above kill streaks, F2000 users were essentially playing on hard mode, struggling to secure kills with what felt like a water pistol disguised as a futuristic rifle. China Lake, Mine, Call of Duty Black Ops. Explosive weapons in Call of Duty have always walked a fine line between frustratingly overpowered and uselessly inconsistent. The China Lake grenade launcher from Black Ops fell squarely into the latter category, establishing itself as one of the most disappointing explosive weapons in franchise history. Based on a real-world pump-action grenade launcher, the China Lake seemed promising on paper, an explosive weapon that could be used as a secondary. In practice, it was an exercise in frustration. The blast radius was inconsistently small, often requiring direct hits to secure kills. The pump-action mechanism meant that follow-up shots were slow, and the projectile arc made accurate fire difficult at anything beyond point-blank range. Compared to other explosive options like the RPG-7 or even the standard frag grenade, the China Lake offered no meaningful advantages while suffering from numerous drawbacks. It occupied your secondary weapon slot without providing the reliable utility that a pistol might offer in close quarters. Even the novelty of having a pump-action grenade launcher wore thin after the first few times you failed to kill an enemy standing directly in the blast radius. The China Lake represents a particular category of bad Call of Duty weapons, those that seem cool in concept but fail utterly in execution. It wasn't just statistically weak, and it felt bad to use, offering none of the satisfaction that should come from firing explosive rounds at your enemies. PM63 MQ Call of Duty Black Ops. Sticking with Black Ops, which honestly had several contenders for worst weapons, let's examine the PM63 SMG. If the QC was bad, the PM63 was somehow even worse. A weapon that felt like it was designed specifically to frustrate players. The PM63 was a direct downgrade to the MAC-11, which was itself inferior to the Spectre. It required one more shot to kill, in all scenarios compared to the FAMAS. Despite having the same fire rate and center speed value, it had more recoil per shot and a 33% smaller magazine capacity, all while being limited to SMG handling characteristics and attachments. The attachment selection was particularly dismal, offering little to address the weapon's core weaknesses. Even with upgrades, the PM63 couldn't compete with other SMGs, let alone assault rifles. It occupied that unenviable position of being not just the worst in its class, but arguably one of the worst weapons in the entire game. The PM63 represents a special kind of failure in game design, a weapon that is objectively worse than its counterparts in every measurable way. There was no niche it filled, no unique role it played. It was simply inferior, existing as a trap option for unwitting players who hadn't yet unlocked better SMGs. MP443 Grach, Call of Duty Ghosts. Pistols in Call of Duty have typically been seen as weapons of last resort, something you pull out when your primary runs dry in the middle of a firefight. But the MP443 Grach in Call of Duty Ghosts redefined how useless a sidearm could be, setting a new standard for terrible secondary weapons. The Grach could technically kill in 2 shots if you were within 2 meters of your target. In practical gameplay, it typically required 3 to 5 shots to eliminate an enemy, making it significantly weaker than most primary weapons. The damage fall-off was so severe that beyond point-blank range, the Grach might as well have been firing confetti. In a game where certain weapons were notoriously powerful, the Grach stood out as particularly pathetic. It offered no meaningful advantages over other pistols, and even as a last resort option, it was unlikely to save you in most situations. The Grach was so bad that it essentially forced players to use other secondary options like launchers or melee weapons, as even those were more reliable than trying to use this pea shooter in combat. The MP443 Grach represents the absolute bottom of the barrel for sidearms in Call of Duty. It wasn't just weak, it was arguably worse than having no secondary weapon at all, since at least then you wouldn't be tempted to waste time switching to it in a desperate moment. Machine Pistol, Call of Duty World War II. The concept of a fully automatic pistol in Call of Duty is always tantalizing, a pocket-sized SMG for when things get truly desperate. The machine pistol in Call of Duty World War II took that promise and utterly shattered it, establishing itself as perhaps the most useless secondary weapon in the entire franchise. This weapon was an exercise in frustration from the ground up. The machine pistol was plagued by a fatal combination of flawed mechanics. It possessed a decently high fire rate of 722 RPM, which sounds powerful but was actually a core weakness. This rate of fire meant it would empty its tiny 10-round magazine in a mere 0.83 seconds, coupled with intense visual recoil and a wide hip-fire spread that made controlling its wild spray nearly impossible. Even if a player miraculously managed to connect with a target, the pitiful damage output sealed its fate. It required a minimum of 4 shots to kill up close, dropping to a dismal 6 shots at range. Its damage dropped off severely after just 250 units of distance, one of the shortest ranges in its class. This meant that beyond point-blank range, the machine pistol's time to kill became astronomically slow, being easily outgunned by every primary weapon and even most other pistols. It was notoriously unreliable for securing a single kill even if you landed your shots, as the small magazine could be depleted before a target was eliminated. The community's verdict on the machine pistol is clear. It was almost universally panned. It was described as a hit marker machine that was outclassed in every way by other secondaries. Players found that they were far more likely to give their position away and die while reloading than they were to win any engagement. It was a last resort that actively made your situation worse, a weapon so fundamentally broken that it became a legendary symbol of disappointment in Call of Duty's long history of armaments. Sawed-off shotgun, Call of Duty World War II. Shotguns are meant to be the ultimate panic button, a guarantee that at point-blank range, one pull of the trigger will solve your problem. The sawed-off shotgun in Call of Duty World War II betrayed this fundamental contract with the player, earning a legendary reputation for its unforgivable inconsistency and solidifying its place as one of the most frustrating secondaries in franchise history. This double-barrel secondary's failure was a matter of cold, hard statistics. The sawed-off had a critical design flaw. Its pellet spread was among the widest and most random of any shotgun in the game. It fired 8 pellets per shell, but to achieve a one-shot kill, a player needed a punishing 5 of those 8 pellets to connect with the target within its extremely short effective range. This requirement was far less forgiving than other shotguns, and the random spread made its performance wildly unreliable. Even when an enemy was directly in front of you, the unpredictable pattern could easily result in a hit marker instead of a kill, leaving you completely vulnerable. To add insult to injury, the weapon's effective range was brutally short. Its one-shot kill potential dropped off dramatically after just 4.5 meters, and beyond 7.5 meters it was virtually incapable of securing a kill without requiring both shells. This pitiful range meant that even SMGs and rifles could easily outgun it in close quarters, the very range it was designed to dominate. Compounding these issues was its agonizingly slow reload mechanics. Each shell required a separate, lengthy animation, leaving the player completely exposed for a full 3.5 seconds to reload both barrels. This punishing downtime combined with its tiny 2-shell capacity meant that missing your first shot or getting a hit marker was often a death sentence. It was universally panned for its inconsistency and described as a high-risk, low-reward weapon. Unlike other shotguns that traded ammo capacity for immense power, the sawed-off offered no power to justify its massive limitations. It was the ultimate gamble, and the house in this case, any enemy player almost always won. It became a symbol of frustration, a weapon so notoriously bad that getting it in the gun game mode was considered an automatic loss. Sidewinder, Call of Duty Modern Warfare 3/Warzone. Battle rifles in Call of Duty are designed to be hard-hitting, slower-firing powerhouses that reward accuracy and control. The Sidewinder in Modern Warfare 3 inverted this philosophy completely, creating a weapon that managed to have all the drawbacks of a battle rifle with none of the upsides. Dubbed a highly adaptable battle rifle chambered in a 450 Huntsman that delivers high damage at close to mid-range in its official description, this was a promise the base weapon spectacularly failed to keep. This gun's failure was multifaceted and rooted in its fundamental statistics. At launch, it featured a painfully slow base fire rate of 375 rounds per minute. This was significantly slower than most SMGs and assault rifles, immediately putting it at a severe disadvantage in any direct engagement. Compounding this issue was its dreadful damage range and shockingly high recoil. Beyond 15 meters, its time to kill ballooned to over 800 millimeters, making it impossible to use effectively at the medium to long ranges, the class it was meant to dominate. The weapon's stats showed extreme gun kick and vertical recoil values, making sustained fire incredibly difficult to control. The community consensus, as reflected in loadout guides and weapon tier lists, was swift and brutal. The Sidewinder had virtually no redeeming qualities without significant attachment investment. It was routinely outgunned by SMGs up close and outclassed by every other assault and battle rifle at range. Its identity crisis was so profound that player guides explicitly advised it to fire in short bursts instead of emptying a whole clip in one go, just to manage its uncontrollable kick, a stunning recommendation for a weapon supposedly built for adaptability. It was a weapon without a purpose, a collection of the worst possible stats assembled into a single, profoundly disappointing package. Even after buffs, it remained a niche pick, forever remembered by the community for its catastrophic launch state as a benchmark for failure in the arsenal of Modern Warfare 3. SO-14, Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2. The SO-14 represents everything that can go wrong with a weapon designed by committee. This battle rifle's fundamental identity crisis makes it a master of none. Too clumsy for close quarters, too unwieldy for precision work, and too inconsistent for mid-range engagements. Its select fire functionality becomes a trap rather than a feature, offering the illusion of versatility while delivering nothing but frustration. In semi-auto mode, the weapon's sluggish fire rate and disappointing damage output make it lose to virtually every other weapon in its class. The requirement for 2 precise headshots to secure a kill becomes a cruel joke when facing opponents with fully automatic weapons. Switching to full auto transforms the SO-14 into a wild beast of uncontrollable vertical climb, making sustained fire as practical as trying to write your name during an earthquake. What truly cements its status as a bottom-tier weapon is how much attachment investment it requires just to become serviceable. While other guns perform well straight out of the box, the SO-14 demands extensive tuning and specific attachments merely to function at a basic level. Even when fully optimized, it still gets outclassed by stock versions of other battle rifles. For these reasons, the SO-14 became an instant community meme not just for being weak, but for so spectacularly failing to fulfill its promised role in Modern Warfare 2's arsenal. MK14 Call of Duty Advanced Warfare. The MK14 in Advanced Warfare is a classic story of a weapon being completely out of place. In a game defined by its blistering fast exosuit mobility, the MK14 was an anchor trying to compete with jet skis. Contrary to a common misconception, it wasn't patched into oblivion from a position of strength. Instead, it's a story of a gun that launched in an incredibly weak state and received buffs that were simply too little, too late. Its core design was fundamentally at odds with the game's pace from day one. The launch flaws were a perfect storm of misery, a painfully slow rate of fire of roughly 545 RPM that lost to every automatic weapon, a tiny 20-round magazine that emptied in a blink, and a reload time that felt like an eternity. But the real killer was its pitiful damage. It hit like a wet noodle, often requiring 3 to 4 shots to kill, which completely negated its semi-auto purpose and turned every gunfight into a futile exercise in frustration. The developers did try to fix it. Post-launch patches actually buffed the MK14, increasing its fire rate to around 600 RPM and improving its damage and recoil. But for most players, these fixes never addressed the fundamental problem. Sure, it had a high headshot multiplier, making it a theoretical monster in the hands of an expert. But in the chaotic, exosuited frenzy of Advanced Warfare, that theory was useless. It was a practical nightmare, a gun that demanded perfection while rewarding you with inconsistency. Its only true saving grace was in hardcore mode, where its one-shot potential finally shone. But in standard play, the MK14 became a footnote, a weapon you only used if you hated having fun or were attempting a brutally masochistic challenge.